Should Genesis 1 be taken literally or not? I think without any good reasons that one can propose, either in genre or literary devices, we should prefer a literal interpretation of Genesis 1. But that being said, let's take a look at some of the reasons other people have proposed for thinking that Genesis 1 is not literal. First, I want to address what I'm going to call the grand canvas view. And this is the notion that when it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," that it's suggesting that the universe is almost like this grand canvas that God is going to paint his artwork on. So in the beginning, he puts out a giant canvas. And then on days 1 through 3, he draws these lines. And then on days 4 through 6, he fills in those lines. And then he's finished his artwork by day 7 and he rests. So on day 1, it says that he separates the light from the darkness, right? And that directly corresponds to day 4, where he creates the sun, moon, and stars. So, and then on day 2, it said that he creates an expanse and he separates the waters below from the waters above. So you have kind of this sky notion and the waters below. And then on day 5, he fills that in with the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. Then you have on day 3. On day 3, he separates the waters and the land. And this is filled in with him creating man and the creatures to fit in on the land. So here you have days 1, 2, and 3 going together with days 4, 5, and 6 as they line up together. Some would see this as literary confirmation because of its very poetic, neat nature, how the days fit together. So, and then finally on the 7th day, he rests and his artwork and picture is complete. Now, let's look at another view or whatever, which is called just a more poetic view, right? And this is just the notion that they are looking at it and saying it seems a little more poetic in nature because of some of the themes and the repetitive nature that's going on. If you notice, right, time after time it's saying, "And then God said," "And then God said," evening and morning, "And then God said," evening and morning. There's a theme that's repeated day after day after day. So they're saying, oh, hey, you know what? This reminds me of some literary devices. And not to mention, they would suggest that it seems more poetic because of other problems in the text. For instance, the notion of light preceding the sun, moon, and stars. They think that these things are lending to the idea that it's not meant to be taken literally, but that it's meant to be understood in a slightly different way. So I think it's important to take a look at each one of those and understand, is it trying to say something in a different way that you wouldn't normally read history? And they would point to the idea that Genesis 1 doesn't read like the book of Joshua. When you have historical accounts, they feel like Genesis 1 looks a lot different, feels a lot different, has themes that are very much consistent with a poetic idea, has a very different feel to it. And not to mention, they might also point to some of the numerological elements of Genesis 1. So, and then I would like to mention Augustine. Augustine also had a little bit more of allegorical view. Now, I think it's totally worth mentioning that he didn't feel like allegory was the entire story, or that he didn't look at Genesis as history, but rather he felt like it had a lot of other significant meanings in the text other than just a literal reading of history. He felt like you could draw out more things from the text than simple history. One of the problems that he felt like led more to allegorical meanings and non-literal meanings were problems such as the light preceding the sun, moon, and stars. So, because light is supposed to be there in day 1, but the sun, moon, and stars come on day 4. He also felt like that in general, the whole creation account happened in one day, and that God was simply kind of painting these other systems or ways of kind of explaining a sequence of events. The sequence was more meant for the pattern. And he also points to the Sabbath day as for one of these reasons in believing that it wasn't meant to be as literal as some people might think. The Sabbath day, because it wasn't as though the Sabbath was the time that God needed to rest because he was tired, but rather it's more symbolic and more representative of something much larger and much bigger than the notion that God just needed to stop working. He also pointed to chapter 2. He pointed to chapter 2 because he felt like the first thing that it says in chapter 2 is in the day that God created, and it's using the singular. In other words, he's thinking, okay, so the creative act took place in one day, as it says in chapter 2. And not only that, but it points to the idea that the shrubs of the field, the bushes, had not been risen up yet. So he felt like all of these things were very, very important, and he was trying very hard to do a good exegetical work of the book, and that if you were to exegetically believe and take out of it that light precedes the sun, moon, and stars, that this was a serious problem. So I think it's worth noting that these scholars have taken the Word of God very seriously. Now, does that mean that we have to take Genesis 1 for some sort of literary, poetic, other sort of meaning? It does not mean that. But I do think it's important for us to understand what is meant in Genesis 1.